Hello. Hi, everyone coming in. Welcome, welcome. Just letting you all in. I see some very familiar names in the Zoom room, which is great. This is a lovely group. So hi, everyone. I think a lot of you know me. My name is Sari. I'm the Public Programs Director at MOFAD, Museum of Food and Drink. So welcome back. If you've been to MOFAD before, and by MOFAD, I mean any of our exhibitions, any of our programs, whether virtual, whether in person, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. If this is your first time coming to a MOFAD event, it's really great to be doing virtual programs again. We did a lot of them for about 2 years straight nonstop when there were no in-person options. And I love that we are continuing them again because we have such an incredible community all over the country. And I'm just super happy that we get to continue those relationships and networks that we built during that time. So for those of you in New York, we are doing in-person programs in a lot of different locations, as well as the virtual ones, and some programs are even hybrid. So it's a whole new experience. So I hope you get to join us again in whatever way feels most convenient. So tonight we are celebrating Sunday Best, the cookbook by Adrienne Cheatham that most of you are probably familiar with. And I'm so thrilled to have Adrienne here in conversation with the amazing Osayi Endolyn. So quickly want to introduce them both. I'm going to start with Chef Adrienne because Osayi is going to lead the conversation. So I'll introduce her and then just kind of turn it over. And there will be a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. We can use the chat function for that. All right, so Chef Adrienne was the runner-up on season 15 of Top Chef. She was the chef de cuisine under Marcus Samuelsson. She opened Street Bird and Marcus's Bermuda before she was promoted to executive chef at Red Rooster in Harlem. Before that, she spent 8 years at the 3 Michelin star restaurant Le Bernardine, and she is the founder of Sunday Best. That sounds familiar, a pop-up series held in various locations around Harlem. And of course, as you know, she is the author of the cookbook Sunday Best. And Osayi Endolyn is a James Beard Award-winning writer and storyteller on food culture. She's a consultant, a producer, and a cultural commentator. Her approach explores the nexus of food and identity. Her essays appear in collections such as Black Food, Women on Food, and You and I Eat the Same. She is the writer of Ghetto Gastro Presents Black Power Kitchen, which is just out this past week. And with Marcus Samuelsson, she wrote the bestseller, The Rise, Black Cooks, and the Soul of American Food. And her own narrative on American restaurants and dining culture is forthcoming, which we are very excited about. So thank you both so much for being here, and thank you for everyone watching. And Osayi, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Hello, it's nice to see y'all, be with y'all. What's up, Adrienne?
Hello.
So you're in New York right now.
Yes, you just left, right?
Yes, I'm in Los Angeles. That's why it is still bright and shiny here. I'm trying to soak up the last rays of the day.
Nighttime here.
Well, on this Wednesday evening, we're going to be talking about some Sunday traditions. And I thought we would start with, what Sunday Best means to you. This is like something that pulls up a lot of images in people's minds. So what's that definition for you?
It does pull up different things. So when I was little and I first started hearing the term Sunday Best, sorry, this camera does its own zoom in, zoom out thing.
I was like, whoa, you got a producer? I'm like, okay.
Oh, it's like, look, Ma, no hands. But so when I was growing up, I heard the term, not necessarily in Chicago, but when we would spend the summers going down to see my dad's family in Mississippi, they would always talk about, like, it was early 90s, late 80s, like we dressed like tomboys. We were wearing oversized rugby shirts, Timbs, Air Force Ones, like that's how girls were dressing then. And my great aunt would always say, like, put on, instead of wearing like boxer shorts and a t-shirt around the house, she's like, go put on a house dress. I'm like, what is a house dress? And so whenever we were going into town in Jackson, there was the black side of town and then the regular, I guess, side of town. Some stores you had to go to the regular side of town, but she wouldn't let us just wear whatever when we went to that side of town. she would tell us to put on our Sunday best. And coming from Chicago, we had only packed one outfit for church for the 3 or 4 Sundays we were going to be in Mississippi. And she would make us put on our church clothes to go to town. So in my mind as a kid, Sunday best was strictly church clothes. It wasn't like dressing nice or looking good. It was like only church clothes. But then as I got older and I heard the term here in Harlem or in Chicago, people used it to refer to just getting dressed up. So it kind of changed and expanded as I got older. But when I first heard it, to me, it was like the fold over socks, you know, the little belted dress with like a little petticoat kind of thing under it. Like that's to me what Sunday best was.
So I want to back up because you said something that actually made me pause. So I want to like unpack it a little bit. You talked about, so you're from Chicago and your family has, you know, its roots in Mississippi. And obviously you spent a lot of time there growing up. You just described going to Jackson and there being a Black side of town. And then you said a regular side of town. So I want you to unpack that because I'm a little lit up, but I don't want to make assumptions. Let's talk about
the regular side of town was, there were stores that catered to Black people and there were shops and that's where you went to pay your bills. But all the Black owned stores were on a different side of town. Mm-hmm. So some of these were owned by non-Black people maybe, but it was where you went to pay bills. It's where like the diner was, where the elementary school was. So I don't call it the regular side of town because that's where everybody went. There was a big Mexican community. There was a part Choctaw community in Jackson. So everybody went to that side of town to pay bills. You know, you physically had to pay bills in person back then and go to the water board. You know, you had to like, yeah.
I wanted to ask about that because, you know, in your book, you talk so much about experiences that are framed in Black communities. And sometimes, you know, we have the challenge in our storytelling of being treated like our culture is other as opposed to being the centerpiece of the narrative. So I didn't want regular to be a stand-in for things that aren't Black and for Black to be something that is exclusive, even though it is special. You know what I'm saying? So thank you for that. Okay, so you talked about this petticoat look and all these things. As you talk about in the book, which is such a joyous, optimistic celebration, you know, you talk about how you started cooking for folks actually in college. You went to Florida AMU, also known as FAMU. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you started this concept with your sister?
So I kind of was brought into what she was already doing. My sister was 2 years ahead of me at FAM. So she was a junior when I got there my freshman year. And I never lived on campus. We shared an apartment together off campus. I was very lucky for that. And my sister and her previous roommate in their apartment had been doing Sunday dinners at their house where they would cook. Sometimes people would bring stuff over too. But then when my sister and I were roommates, we pretty much did all the cooking because we were spending that time together. So we would like prep stuff on Saturday, cook on Sunday. We would like wake up early, you know, put the yams in the oven and then get the green. You know, it was like a lazy but kind of fun day where we just one by one got everything going, and then friends would come over, like trickled throughout the afternoon, help cook, make a dessert. Like it was just such a fun kind of like communal thing that once somebody got there with their groceries, we would all cook whatever they were making or responsible for together.
Yeah.
But it was something that she had started a couple years before. She and her roommate, Chavez, used to do it every Sunday. And then, yeah, when my sister and I were roommates, we just kind of took it over and it was dubbed Cheatham Soul Food Sundays.
So how did you and your sister learn how to cook in the household? Who was cooking and who were you watching? I know you grew up in the restaurant with your mom, but you also had a lot of grandmothers hovering around, 3 or 4, as you say in the book. Can you talk about some of those influences in that generating that family Cheatham tradition?
So I wish I had paid more attention when I was little to people cooking. I can't lie, like I was not super into it. I was interested because I had seen it in restaurants all the time, but there was such a distinct difference between my family cooking at home and seeing people cook in a restaurant. So at home, it was, you know, it was more casual, it was fun, but that was the stuff that we ate. So when I was growing up, I would see people cook, but not really see the whole thing. Because I was a kid, I would go play with my cousins when we were at my grandmother's house. And my great aunt in Mississippi, who was like one of my best friends, she doesn't cook.
Oh,
She
nice.
will if she has to, but she does not like to cook. Her name
I
is
love
Ruby.
that for her.
She's 97, and Miss Ruby did not like to cook ever.
Okay.
Even when her husband was still with us, before Uncle Curtis passed, he would always say, "The church brings us food, but your great aunt barely cooks." So she was not into it. And she would cook grits and like sausages for breakfast. That was it. That was it. So the rest of it, I kind of like, my sister and I were kind of figuring it out. Once we started cooking together, she had to show me a lot because she had been figuring it out for the previous 2 years with her roommate. But when I got there, I was like, oh yeah, didn't Aunt Dottie like roll her collard greens and like put them in the pot side by side? And so we're trying to like navigate all this. And I mean, this was pre-smartphone and video, but we would actually call like my aunts in Chicago when we were starting to cook to ask them like, okay, Aunt Cookie makes the best greens, so let's call her, find out how long she boils like the ham hocks or smoked turkey for before adding the greens in, and what seasoning does she use? Who's partial to Laurie's versus salt and actual spices they put in? So, you know, it was a
I think that's
process.
how a lot of us figure it out. I mean, for people who weren't like right up in the kitchen with an adult, I think a lot of us have to reflect, and you rely on memory and that rhythm, and just you notice that even though you said you're not paying attention, you actually saw quite a bit, you know, especially if you're seeing these dishes turned out repeatedly, you know.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful. So, all right. I want to hear a little bit about, you know, throughout the book, you know, you reference your experiences in professional kitchens, namely Le Bernardin, and, you know, your work, you know, in Harlem with Marcus. Can you talk a little bit about your, you know, all the kind of remixing and influences that these restaurant experiences have had on creating a home cooking narrative, right? Like those are two, as you just said, really different vibes, and you know, you're trying to create something that feels leisurely. Like, you know, some of these recipes, you know, they take a little effort, but they're very approachable, they're very beautiful. We'll get into the food in a moment, but I want to hear a little bit about how like these really kind of intense focused environments, you know, influenced how you may present food for people that you love and when you're entertaining.
So I had a couple of moments at Le Bernardin, especially, where I started to pull up and stop just executing, but think about food in a broader perspective and think about how it's prepared this way, why it's prepared this way, who prepared it before, and how did they do it at home. And that's what all cuisine that is served in restaurants and in fine dining settings, it's all coming from a place where somebody's grandmother or mother was in a rural area cooking some of these dishes. And then over time, people take them out of that time and place and refine them or change them or make them more like fine dining appropriate or whatever. But they're essentially just recreating things that have been done for years in somebody's home. And I wanted to kind of bridge that gap because the pop-up series, the food is a little more fine dining style on the plate, but just because there's like a gumbo sauce doesn't mean that I'm skipping steps to make gumbo to yield that sauce. So I wanted to show that in restaurants, it all starts from home cooking. So no matter how fancy you want to make it look on the plate, it's all starting with the exact same things that we learned from our families before and that people's families have been doing at home. Like that's how French cuisine is, this venerated, elegant cuisine, is people just started taking it out of their grandmother's kitchens and playing with it. And this is kind of bringing it back to the kitchens to show where it came from in the first place. And I love showing that the moment that I really realized I wanted to make the book a little more homey as opposed to pop-up dishes was when I realized, like, where do these pop-up dishes come from? And I always think about this experience I had at Le Bernardin where, you know, you learn how to make roux and bechamel and mornay in culinary school. But at Le Bernardin, like, one of the chefs was making it and was like, trying to break down the steps. And I'm like, that's exactly what my grandmother or aunt in Mississippi did when they're making mac and cheese.
Mhm.
So I was kind of like, they didn't call it bechamel. They didn't call it mornay. They just called it making macaroni and cheese. So I kind of like to bring it back to home to show that even if you don't call it by whatever these French chefs are calling it, we all cook the same. Technique is technique for a reason. And it doesn't have to be in a Michelin star restaurant to be the exact same thing that your grandmother does in Mississippi. So just kind of demystifying that was kind of the goal.
I always find it interesting that all those classic texts that are so revered in French, driven culinary programs or study, they're always thanking their grandmothers and the mothers. Like no one ever connects those dots. I think it's really important that, especially, in our language as storytellers, I sometimes get ruffled when I hear people even saying like, oh, we're elevating it. And I'm like, I think it was pretty elevated. Like I think a lot of these women were doing, pretty elevated things already. So,
Yeah.
I really appreciate that correlation that you're making. So,
but that's interesting because we've had that conversation before. And that's something that you had mentioned before a couple of years ago, I think, where you talked about the difference between elevating and is it elevating? And so that kind of made me start thinking about it on a different level too, saying it was elevated already. Just because they're changing the execution or the plating doesn't mean that the cuisine wasn't elevated to begin with.
Or the environment in which the dish is being prepared and by whom
right.
Is the interpretation, and we see so many folks deal with that framing in relationship to the pricing of certain types of food, and you see all these reviews. So yeah, that goes down a really long hole of a lot of misinformation. I love to hear that acknowledgement and to present and say so. Okay, we got a little bit of the vibe of Sundays. I want to hear about so how long have you been in Harlem now?
Oh, geez, I've been in Harlem probably 12 years.
Okay, I thought it was going to be quite a little bit longer, but okay. So you spent.
I think I've been in New York for about 15, so it's either 12 or 13 years.
Okay. And you came directly from where to Harlem?
I came from Florida.
Came from Miami. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I wasn't sure. Okay. So that I wasn't sure if you spent some of your adult life socializing in Chicago, because I was gonna say these are two really like iconic Black cities for like especially kind of Sunday vibes. But tell me what Sundays are like in Harlem and how that has shaped your idea of this type of celebratory food.
Sundays are my favorite day in any neighborhood, essentially, but especially in Harlem. And part of the reason is because when I was working in restaurants, Sunday was my only guaranteed day off. I could be working 6 days a week, but I always had Sunday off no matter what. Even if my day off got taken away and I got called into work, I could always count on Sunday being my day. And I had a routine. I was up on 133rd between 6 and 7, between Lenox and Adam Clayton, for those who go by the names. And I would walk down there. There was the Starbucks that opened up. The Magic Johnson Foundation was bringing Starbucks to underserved and Black communities. So that first Starbucks opened up. This was before Red Rooster was there. I would walk, get a coffee, walk around the Marshalls for about 45 minutes, sipping my coffee, letting the caffeine work its way into my system. And then I would go to the 24-hour Planet Fitness at the corner across from where Red Rooster is now, and kind of work out. I don't know how to stop this camera. And do a little workout. I would not really do too much because I already worked in restaurants and that's a lot of physical activity. Yeah. But that was kind of my routine of like walking around Marshalls. And then when I left the gym, I would walk down that corridor on Lenox between 135th and to like 110 or 116. And then I would walk on 125th. And I would usually get another coffee or something else to just sip and walk around. But it was so much fun. And when Chez Lucien opened up, I would post up in the later afternoon on Sunday and like have a glass of wine sitting on Lenox. You know, just, it was just such a fun,
people watching.
It was great people watching and it was so much fun.
Yeah.
And you see people, you know, like that was how I started to get to know people in the neighborhood too. So it was just great. It was just such a feeling, like a vibe. And it was the first place in New York that I had lived where people made eye contact. So every other neighborhood in Brooklyn where I lived before moving to Harlem, you walk by people on the street and they don't see you. Your neighbors try to run and shut the door before you get up the stairs so that they don't have to interact with you. But in Harlem, people would like, it reminded me of Chicago. They would give a head nod, say, how you doing, while they pass you on the street.
Yeah.
And so it felt like people cared. So that's why I never left Harlem, because to me, it was the first place in New York where I didn't feel so on my own. I felt like I had a community that I was a part of.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, I do find, so I live in Flatbush and in Brooklyn, and I have found that when I go to Harlem, there's just like that greeting, that sense of, I don't want to necessarily say community, but you know, there is that space for, I don't know, it's like a sonic energy that just from that, like you can't just be in your bubble, like someone's going to interact with you in Harlem.
Yep. Whether you like it or not.
At least that's a Black person. I always feel like I'm like talking to so many people when I'm in Harlem. It's just, yeah. All right, so let's get into some of the food in Sunday Best. First of all, I want to hear about, you know, kind of bridging your restaurant experience. You talk about having the pleasure, the honor of cooking for Aretha Franklin, who treated her birthday as a glorious Sunday, it sounds like, at Le Bernardin.
Every year.
And so like, this is not necessarily the most flashy recipe in the book, but talk about this buttermilk dressing, ranch dressing, and Ms. Franklin, please tell the story.
Oh my gosh. So I don't, you know, you're a chef, you stay in the kitchen. I'm not, you know, I wasn't the chef who was out in the dining room. That wasn't my restaurant to be doing that. So whenever like VIP customers would come in, they would write their name up on the ticket board. So we knew who was at what table. And one year I was like, it was my first year there. And I was like, wait, does that say Aretha Franklin? I was like, is nobody else freaking out back here but me? Like, what is happening? Aretha Franklin is in the dining room. And the chef was like, yeah, she comes every year on her birthday, because every year for the few days before and after her birthday, she's doing a show at Radio City. So every year she's doing that show around her birthday. And so on her actual birthday for dinner, she brings a group of friends and family, and they sit at the largest table in the middle of the dining room, and they have dinner at Le Bernardin after her show or before her show, or maybe she took the day off from the show. I don't know. But it was no less than 10 people, usually like 14. And she would order a cake that would be brought out into the dining room, the whole nine. But never did she go up to the private dining room. She was always smack in the middle of the main dining room.
She wants to be seen. She's like, look at my birthday feast.
Right?
So tell me, but she didn't order on the menu.
No, she did not. She would order like whatever the fish was for the entree. She would say, give me this fish, but like she would have very specific things that she wanted it served with. And for her first course, she always wanted a shredded carrot salad with raisins and ranch dressing.
I love Bernadette. I love
It was crazy.
it. I love it. I love that.
But you never knew for sure. It's like one year,
So
it's like somebody's prepping, huh?
You were on the fly though. You had to create. So tell us about the sauce that you had to do on the last minute.
So this was like before smartphone, and they're like, my chef was like, "Oh, go make me some ranch." I was like, "I don't know how to make ranch." I was like, "You open a packet of Hidden Valley. I don't know what actually goes into ranch." I'm used to that little seasoning packet, or buying it. So I was like, okay, I know how to make like the French version of a remoulade, which is a little similar, but maybe more herbs and like onion powder and garlic powder. So I'm kind of freestyling and I make a ranch. And I mean, she ate the whole salad, and it was not a small salad because I didn't know what size portion to give. So I made the salad a little too big, I thought, and put extra dressing on the side. And so I kept the extra dressing just in case. And the maitre d' came back and was like, "Is there any more of the ranch dressing for Miss Franklin? We need some more dressing." I was like, "Yeah, I have it right here. She actually likes it." And I was like, oh my God. Because with the French version of a remoulade sauce, they use like creme fraiche and add vinegar. But I was like, this is Aretha Franklin. Like, I went to pastry and stole some buttermilk from their walk-in. And so that was the base of the sauce to get that like acidity and that tang, instead of using like, creme fraiche and then adding vinegar to it. I was like, no, I'm going buttermilk ranch, like all the way. Nothing
Wait, so
else.
she used that was in the carrot salad, or this was in something else?
That was in the carrot salad.
In the carrot salad, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just love that story. Yeah.
And the carrots had to be like shredded, and then they had to be like grated on the box grater.
My God.
She did not like it if they were like cut into long, beautiful julienne. She was like, no, I want it grated on a box grater. Like,
I get that though. I mean, those particularly of her era, musicians are just faced with so much uncertainty, Black musicians, especially on the road. And just, I think that ability to walk into a place and command exactly the thing that you like, that, you want it done a particular way. I mean, I think in some ways it's like unnerving, but I love that she does that. I don't know if you know this story, that she was always paid in cash, and she demanded to be paid in cash. And she would carry her money in her bag, in her purse, and like set it on the piano like when she performed. I've seen her do
love
it.
that. Because if you think about, especially like Black musicians, like you were saying, of her time and before her, a lot of times would be denied service wherever they went. So I love the fact that like she was able to walk into La Bernadette and have all these people like go crazy to serve her exactly what she wanted. And I was happy to be a part of that, because to me, it showed such an evolution of the time and the respect that she was paid at that point in her life. And I was happy to be a part of that.
Oh yeah, she demanded it. Yeah, there was one club promoter who told me that she left her bag on the stage one time and the crowd was wanting an encore, and she was like, no, there's not gonna be any encore. She had told the promoter like beforehand, and realizes she left her purse on the stage and comes back, and the crowd's like, oh my god, she's coming back to the encore. She grabs her bag and just walks right off. I love that. Yeah.
Her money bag.
Okay, so let's get into some dishes, not just sauces and stories. I don't know. You tell me. There's a lot of like breakfast vibes in this book. Like, what are some of the go-tos? What are you cooking up for friends when I come over? The appetite. What's the spread?
So next time I get you to come up to Harlem, if it's breakfast, we are going to be having the tater tot waffles, because those are some of my favorite. Salmon croquettes, probably grits, and then probably some form of fried egg on those.
Okay.
But that's like a go-to breakfast.
I heard that. Okay, so the tater tot waffles. Let's talk about those a little bit. What's happening?
That
Very
is,
self-explanatory, but still. Break it down for people.
so growing up, my mom would get these, she worked for Kraft after she left restaurants. So she would get these, literally, if you've ever been to a Waffle House, you know the hash browns that they use, those shredded potato things.
Covered. That's what I like.
So those come in this paper carton that looks like a milk carton, but like bigger. It's like a 10-pound thing, but you pour water in up to that line and it hydrates the shredded potatoes. So my mother would do all kind of things with these hydrated potatoes. And one time she put them in the waffle iron instead of just putting them in a pan to make hash browns, and they were amazing. I love potatoes, some of my favorite food. So any form the potato can take, I'm in. And so tater tots, huge fan. I love tater tots. I always keep a bag in my freezer. And one day I was just like, I wonder, they're already toasted on the outside, but I wonder what would happen if I put these in the waffle iron. And they were delicious. They were delightful. So that is something that I love. You get like the crunchy parts and then the soft potato
the best
inside.
part. If I'm ordering hash browns at Waffle House, I want them crispy. I don't want like moderate hash browns. Commit to the hash browns. So salmon croquettes was next. And you can't get salmon croquettes everywhere, or at least I believe you shan't order them everywhere. That is what I have learned on my travels.
Your extensive travels.
Where does salmon croquettes come into your repertoire, and what kind of vibe are you giving yours?
So salmon croquettes are a staple, and they're not something that people make all the time. It was like a special treat. We didn't just whip out salmon croquettes all the time. It was like, that's when somebody was really trying to show out.
She said, I'm VIP, y'all. I'm coming over. Salmon croquettes. Thank you.
If you make the trek to Harlem, yes, I've got you. VIP status all the way.
This was a special thing that y'all pulled out.
Yeah, it was actually my cousin, who's about 10 years older than me, Chelsea. She lives in Chicago. Her father in Mississippi, I found out, was not actually my blood uncle. He was just my father's best friend from the time that they were kids. But he's still my uncle. She's my cousin. And she made salmon croquettes for me when I went to her apartment. So when she moved out on her own, she was around 18, 19, and she had moved out of my grandmother's house and was living in her first apartment. And it was walking distance from where I lived with my family. So we would go over to her house to hang out because she was like the cool older cousin, and we could get away from our parents. We didn't have to be at our grandmother's house. So it was like our first taste of like freedom for all the cousins, because the oldest cousin looked out for everybody. And so the first thing that she cooked one time I went over to her house was salmon croquettes. And I was endlessly interested in how they came together, but I thought it was it wasn't gross, but I wasn't a fan of taking the salmon out of the can and picking out the bones and the skin. Wasn't really my jam, but I love the salmon croquettes. So when I started working at Le Bernardin, there's a salmon salad that they make called salmon rillette that everybody gets for lunch. No matter what you're ordering, if you sit down at table for lunch, you get a little bowl of salmon rillette and some sourdough toast to have with it. And I saw them blanching the salmon in like white wine and shallots. And I was like, wait, when it's cooked, it's like, and then they're folding it into the thing. I'm like, I just got flashbacks of my cousin making salmon croquettes and was like, so wait, you can cook this. You don't have to use salmon from a can for salmon croquettes? Like, oh my God, this is it was like a mind-bending experience. I was like, I can poach salmon and use it for croquettes. And of course I did. And then instead of doing the mix that they do at Le Bernardin for making the salmon rillette, I was like, ooh, what if I sweat down a bunch of Trinity? Just onion, green bell pepper, celery, all chopped up.
The iconic trio of Creole cuisine. Yes.
Yes. And then, do the same saltine crackers that my cousin used, or if I don't have saltines, I'll use like a handful of panko. But kind of just recreating like the flavors that my cousin used, but adding some of that like cooked out trinity to really just like bring up that flavor and add a little more to it instead of just being salmon and crackers with hot sauce, which is delicious.
I was gonna say that does sound pretty good right now, but yeah, you put some extra something on it.
Put a little love in it.
Yeah, I love that. And that reminds me of we're still going down this menu, but that reminds me of the various fish fritters that you find in the Caribbean, or in the tropical southern United States, Miami conch fritters or saltfish fritters, hot fish, right? Like and it's interesting, always, and just so profound to me to notice those shifts and changes, but there's that through line of of the African history coming through all these different spaces and families. I mean, that like really moves me. That's the kind of stuff that like when nobody's watching, I just get like, choked up about it. That has me deal with the crazy the crazy food media world. Just that connection, and being around people, some of the folks in this room who have been so pivotal in maintaining those stories. So I just wanted to tie that thread. All right.
I love that you noticed that, because sometimes like as chefs, you eat these things and they're of this time and this place, but you forget how they interact sometimes.
Sure.
So it's nice to kind of hear that pointed out, because I wouldn't have necessarily associated like salmon croquettes with conch fritters or bacalao fritters.
Yeah.
But they are of the same type of cooking and come from a similar origin.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see like the use of whatever people had, but there's a framework that is coming from all kinds of influences, but you can see like there's a source, right?
Mm-hmm.
The next thing on your menu, I think you mentioned grits, and now you have a thing like no yellow grits. You want stone ground white grits only.
No, sorry. Yellow, like when the Bob's Red Mill says, it says polenta, AKA grits. I'm like, no. They're not grits. I've never seen yellow grits served anywhere in my family's houses. There were no yellow grits. It's not a thing. The germ of the corn is not yellow.
I didn't grow up eating grits like that. My mom would cook them every now and then out here in Cali, but she was a cream of wheat person, and I just was not down. But when I moved to the South after college, I was introduced to grits on a more regular basis, and it's like so many cultures have just that very neutral comfort food that you can put whatever you want on it. You do it plain. It's like, I think of congee, I think of, just so like rice from Chile, like so many like porridges, like, that you just make it be what you need it to be. And sometimes you just need it to be grits, and sometimes you need it to be savory. You have a mushroom ragu with an egg on your grits in the book. Is that the only, you have grits elsewhere in the book? I don't recall.
There's the overnight grits base recipe, and then on some of the suggestions for some of the different dishes, it's like, this can be served with grits, this can be served with grits too. Like at home I make cacio e pepe grits. It's just Parmesan and black pepper in grits. But I have strong feelings about grits being what they are in that color and everything, because it's important to note that corn is from America, and polenta, for it to be used there, that happened after technically the slave trade was outlawed, but people were still being brought over, and they were trying to recruit workers for plantations. So they were recruiting from Southern Italy, and 3 ships a month would run from Southern Italy and dock around Louisiana, New Orleans area. So you had an influx of Italian immigrants coming over, and some of them went back because nobody wants to work on a plantation. So you had a huge number of Italian immigrants that stayed in Mississippi, Louisiana, in that Gulf Coast area, but a lot went back, and corn was one of the things that they took with them. Yeah. But the grits corn and polenta corn are two different corns. So for corn to be grits, it has to be nixtamalized. And when that happens, you lose that yellow color. And then when the germ is dried out, it's white. It's not yellow. So the process for making polenta is more similar to cracking yellow corn that's been dried, where for grits, hominy grits, they go through a different process. So that's why I get kind of upset when I see yellow grits, because I'm like, wait, were these nixtamalized? What's the process that this germ and this grain and this kernel of corn went through? Is that what my great grandmother Lula did? No, because she would grow her own corn and make her own grits. I'm like, don't call polenta.
Right. I mean, yeah, the incredible process of nixtamalization. Like in Mexico City, I did a food tour and saw, you know, just this whole process happening in the big batch, and they're just this whole team just so focused and rhythmically churning out these amazing, like, you know, masa tortillas. And I'm just like, this is like, you know, this is like the highest level of food to me, you know, like
it
so
is.
fresh.
And that's one of the things that Africans learned from Indigenous Americans and, you know, tribes that had connections in what's now Mexico, because that stretched into that whole area. So bell peppers were brought up, tomatoes were brought up from Mexico, corn was brought up from that area also and planted throughout the South. So to me, grits, hush puppies, anything that's corn and cornmeal based is a direct conduit of like our earliest ancestors that were brought over, and the people who were here that they formed some loose alliances with and learned to work with, work from. They learned how to work with corn from these people. So I like to stay as respectful of that, because how my grandmother did it, how my great grandmother did it, how her mother did it, was how they learned from the people who were already here on how to sustain themselves while they're working on these plantations. So I like to make sure that that's acknowledged and not bastardized and confused with other things.
And so many interpretations of, you know, corn in Black foodways, you know, corn pone, spoon bread, you know, obviously flapjacks. I mean, hoe cakes, excuse me, you know, all kinds. So you talked about the tradition that you're holding, but you like to riff a little bit. And I saw a recipe that caught my eye because I love bell puree. And you have a Hoppin' John bell puree. And, you know, you have a lot of references here from the cultural influences you grew up around or exposed to professionally. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that community in Chicago. You talked about this in your book, like the Puerto Rican community. I think that you were nearby, but let's talk about this. Tell us about bell puree and why you chose to bring Hoppin' John into that conversation.
So I love bell puree. It's something bothering you?
I'm outside and it's like apparently the witching hour. So like, you know, I have friends, but I'm fine.
So chaat is like a family of snacks in Indian cuisine, and it's usually sold. They're usually things that are sold on the street, but they're always a mix of everything you want: sour, salty, a little sweet, some herbs, crunchy. Like they love the texture. So there can be pieces of potato or something soft in there, but it's always balanced by super crunchy things. And then like a tamarind or coriander chutney that kind of gets folded in. So the ingredients can be interchangeable, but a few things are always the same. And I love making crispy black-eyed peas. And there's an ingredient in Indian cuisine called poha, and it's flattened dried rice. And if you fry it, it's like Rice Krispies on steroids. It's like more puffed, more crunchy, super delicious. And, one day I was frying that stuff up at work, the poha at a Red Rooster for a dish that we were using it on. And I had a container of my crispy black eyed peas that were used as a finishing garnish for something. And I was like, we could do a crunchy Hoppin' John. And then it just kind of started progressing from there. When I would have bell puri, I'm like, ooh, instead of regular potato, what if I added sweet potato? Or, a little citric acid or a little of this vinegar. And it just grew. And I started researching more about bell puri, how it's made, what goes into it, and finding other things that I could use to swap in for some of the traditional Indian ingredients for things that are more common in the South. And it was just so much fun to play with.
I have not had this dish, but it sounds so cool because especially, when you named off like, chutneys and tamarind, you're speaking of, ingredients in the East Indian pantry, but I was, coming recently from the Caribbean. I was in Barbados earlier this year, and then St. Lucia later on, and like I think of obviously there's Indian influence there that is very great and well entrenched, but in my mind I'm like, that's Caribbean. Those are Afro-Caribbean ingredients, right? Like, I mean, you see that cross pollination in so many places, and I love. Sometimes you feel like all these combinations is like a stretch, or you're just being, you're doing the most. Sometimes you look at things, but that makes so much sense to me, especially a crispy black eyed pea. I feel like
and then instead of like forcing something with a chutney or a tamarind that may not be as common in Southern cuisine, pepper jelly.
Chow chow. That same sweet kick.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, I think I left off something from this future menu that I'm definitely going to hold you to when I come uptown. But was there other couple dishes that you mentioned in terms of like some of your favorites or things that you would want to present on the spread? We talked about grits, salmon croquettes, tater tot, waffles. I did a little deviation because I remember the bell puri, but what else is happening?
I think for that we would probably just have some fried eggs. Over, keep it kind of easy. There would be some sauces around, some of the condiments to just add as you want, but everything else would just be kind of simple. We're simple people.
I love that. So, we've been outside lately, but Sundays have changed, I feel like, a lot since the last couple of years have taken us all through so many transformations. What does your Sunday best look like nowadays? How are you so for me, I'll tell you, I'll share. I'll just be like, I actually try to go most of the time. I actually saw you recently on a Sunday, but I actually try to go kind of mute on a Sunday, like no talking, no phone, not too much TV, although sometimes it happens, but just being like very quiet. It helps me kind of come back to myself. So much of our work is outward facing and being around one another, which is so great, but it's like a restorative day for me. Even though I don't believe in Mondays anymore, I'm like, this is all a construct. I'll see you on Tuesday. Don't talk to me. But yeah, so what are you doing on your Sundays and how are you making them, feeling vibing the best?
Sundays, I've been trying to, as things do open up more, my husband and I are both traveling more for work and doing as much as we can to try to make up for some lost time. But Sunday, I really do try to spend time with him. Like Sunday is our day to kind of hang out together. I don't really cook much at home, once in a while, but Sunday is a day that we like hang out at the house, hydrate all day, mind our business. And we definitely watch TV. We definitely catch up on like some series and things like that. But we just like literally play around all day, like tease each other or like, make jokes and grab some food, have stuff delivered. pick out stuff from the pantry. Like, how long have we had this? Should we use it before we throw it away? Like, is it, how far past the expiration date is it? And I like to push the boundaries on that.
Oh
He
yeah,
doesn't.
I don't believe in expiration dates. I travel too much. I'm like, ooh, well, let's try it. Let's see.
Talk about a construct.
I'm like, this was just there so somebody wouldn't get sued. It's fine. You know?
Yeah, exactly. So Sundays are dating, like we just have fun. We just like have fun together, reconnect. And it also recharges us as individuals. You know, he loves to like read news and find out what's going on, and I'll kind of more read a book or something like that, because it's just sensory overload when it comes to like news and inundation of information. So Sunday we really just try to like have some me time, but coexist with each other and kind of like recharge ourselves as individuals, but also, you know, kind of like recharge one another for the week ahead.
I love that. That's so beautiful. That's a beautiful ritual. And it doesn't sound like you have any Sunday scaries. So
No scaries.
it's also a construct because Mondays are a construct. Well,
I'm gonna start using that now.
Yeah, totally. Listen, I have a lot of thoughts on that. Thank you to everyone being with us. I think we are going to wrap up, and Sarah is going to come back and give us some closing remarks. Adrienne, I love being with you always. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Osayi. It's
in conversation with you.
Always such a pleasure to spend time with you, whether it's virtually or in person,
and direct,
and see so many wonderful people that we love so much
in the room. Thank you for being here, y'all.
Thank you. Oh, that was so much fun. Osayi, did you tell us what your Sunday tradition is, or is it just like it's too crazy? Like, what is a Sunday?
Oh no, I just said that I try to keep it low key. I try to.
You said you're mute. That's your.
I try to. It doesn't always work out that way because things happen. But when it's intentional, I mostly am trying. I'm like with my incense, my tarot cards, my crystal, my plants. Don't talk to me.
I love that. I mean, I'm kind of curious. Like, I know we're about to wrap, but like, if anyone else has something like that they are very loyal to on Sundays, like just put it in the chat because I'm just curious if anyone has something.
Baths are a big deal for me.
Oh, bats! I thought you said bats. I was like, okay.
Oh no, I don't mess with bats. But
I don't mess with
a morning bath is like very luxurious if you have if you can claim that time for yourself. I feel like a very rich bitch when I take a morning bath.
Yeah, or ever. Like that is
like
very
all I have,
luxurious.
But it's good. Some sense, so thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I also forgot that I wanted to just shout out Bem Books, who was so lovely to partner with us on this. And I think Danielle Davenport, the lovely Danielle, is on the chat tonight. So I just wanted to say like a big thanks. And I'll send everyone an email tomorrow just following up and send you just some social media info so you can follow Adrienne, you can follow Osayi. And if you didn't get Adrienne's book yet, you can order it through Bem, and you can also order Osayi's latest book with Ghetto Gastro through Bem as well, and her book that she wrote, The Rise with Marcus, and her future book that we can't wait to hear about. But it's okay, we're not talking about it. Yeah. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. It was lovely to be in community with you as always, and feel free to just email and tell us what your Sunday rituals are because we want to hear them. All right, everyone, good night and hope to see you soon. Stay safe. Bye.